Yes, chaps, do you see this gentleman right here? This is the baddest Chad in America right now. A Christian with a set of cojones. Finally, it's been long overdue. One Michael Cassidy. Now, the reason I say this is because a bunch of useless Republicans, or just Republicans, and useless kind of goes without saying at this point, allowed the erection of a statue of Satan's Baphomet shrine in the Iowa state capitol under the stupid thing called the First Amendment. And yes, I did just say that. Stay tuned, I'll tell you why. Now, Mr. Cassidy, being a Christian, did not take kindly to the blasphemous display and decided to destroy and behead it. Symbolically speaking, absolutely based. Cassidy said in comments exclusively provided to the Sentinel that he destroyed the shrine on Thursday in order to awaken Christians to the anti-Christian acts promoted by our government. The world may tell Christians to submissively accept the legitimization of Satan, but none of the founders would have considered government sanctions of satanic altars inside Capitol buildings as protected by the First Amendment, Cassidy told the Sentinel. Anti-Christian values have steadily been mainstreamed more and more in recent decades, yes, since the 60s, and Christians have largely acted as the proverbial frog in the boiling pot of water. Cassidy turned himself into police officers present in the Iowa Capitol, who confirmed that the Satanic Temple of Iowa desires to press charges. He raised about 20 grand in less than 3 hours to cover his legal fees, by the way. The Sentinel obtained a complaint and affidavit which said Cassidy was charged with 4th-degree criminal mischief. I saw this blasphemous statue and was outraged, Cassidy continued. My conscience is held captive to the word of God, not to bureaucratic decree, and so I acted. Again, absolutely based. The approval of the shrine drew nationwide backlash from Christians and provoked commentary from senior elected officials. Useless, Iowa Republican Governor Kim Reynolds remarked in a statement that she found the display absolutely objectionable, but said the best response to objectionable speech is more speech in a free society. I think it kind of goes without saying I do not approve of that response. That to me is weak and absolutely pathetic. That is bureaucratic speak for I'm going to be a coward and do nothing whatsoever. That is all that means in practice. Oh, well, the Constitution says so and so. Yeah, so if the Constitution gets subverted and used by the enemies for nefarious purposes, you useless morons will sit back and adhere to that under the guise of being good constitutionalists. These idiots would cede ground to the enemy because they're held hostage by a piece of bloody paper. That argument, free speech should be countered with more speech, that is the dumbest argument that right-wingers use. Free speech is what got the statue erected in the bloody first place, you imbecile. Free speech did not mitigate this, it is what allowed the statue's erection in the bloody first place. Here is where I'm going to get a little contentious. As many of you know, I'm not a free speech absolutist. In fact, I find the concept of free speech absolutism absurd and frankly, incredibly stupid. I'll do a longer video about the subject in more detail at some point, but this is something the right does not understand about their so-called freedoms. What you're really looking at when it comes to freedoms is in essence a form of power. And as the saying goes, with great power comes great responsibility. Not everyone is capable or worthy of wielding such power, only the few are worthy of it. Something that the right cannot get through their noggins because a lot of them are very, very stupid and far too gullible, and they have this unbelievably hard time accepting the reality of their so-called principles. Recognize that any power can be weaponized and turned against you. You know the Frank Herbert quote from Dune? When I am weaker than you, I ask for your freedom because that is according to your principles. But when I am stronger than you, I take away your freedom because that is according to my principles. This can be applied to damn near any of the right so-called principles. And to note there, freedom is not a principle. Freedom is a consequence of principles. I'll say it again. Freedom is not a principle. Freedom is a consequence of principles. Freedom is not the end and be-all of everything. A society where freedom comes above everything else will denigrate into a cesspool of criminal degeneracy. A society is a unit that requires enforcement mechanisms. Look at defunding the police as an example. There's less state authority, less prosecution of criminals. Technically speaking, there is more freedom now, but it doesn't benefit you, only the criminals. You never ever give power to anything that will not reciprocate it in kind. If they don't, then you have to regard and treat them as an enemy, because that is how they look at you. Plain and simple. You're not debating the merits of diplomacy here, you're fighting to win. Principles have no merit or advantage in this arena. That's like giving your opponent a loaded gun because your principles dictate, well, everyone should have one. You don't do that with the Second Amendment, do you? Would you give everyone a gun? No, because some people are criminals and would massacre the population with the weapon. Hell, I can apply that same standard to democracy and the folly of universal suffrage, for heaven's sakes. Here's the truth, right? Universalism, in any form, is bad. Why? Because when you allow everyone access to something, there is no quality control. It simply denigrates into this hellish, idiotic free-for-all. This is why democratic politics in the West is so incredibly stupid, because once you open the floodgates for participation of the masses, you lower the quality of the branding of the candidates, because you now have to appeal to the bulk of the moronic masses who, to put it bluntly, do not have the intellectual capability or interest to engage in or make accurate judgments with regards to the finer aspects of statecraft. Freedom always has the possibility to turn into something capable of transgressions. Therefore, you must have parameters that are absolute. You have to look at society and ask, what liberties are we permitting and why? What is the overall goal of your society? Well, if the overall goal is to allow a maximum amount of self-determination whilst maintaining a healthy, functioning society, you have to look at what are the boundaries erected that preserve that maximal state of self-determination and maintenance of the health and function. Once you have concluded what they are, they have to be defended with unflinching mercilessness. Some things in society are absolute, off the table, and never to be discussed, questioned, or overruled under any circumstances. The innocence of children being a good example. Here is the reality. Every space must be defended from the undesirables. A bit of a loaded phrase that, but it comes in many forms depending on what you're defending and from what. Take, for example, in gaming or cultural spheres. It's often niche things. You defend those against the others because flooding in of the masses means mass appeal, mainstreaming the niche, which would remove the niche and removing the quality. We call this gatekeeping. Now, when the state does the exact same thing, we call that national security. Different environment, but it's the same theme. If you were the Tsar of Russia during the early part of the 20th century, you would have been completely in your right to deal with the Bolsheviks with military force. Why? Because they were going to overthrow your regime. Security is paramount. Here's an interesting way of looking at it. Getting back to the crime example. Let's say you lived in a place that had draconian punishment for crime. The kind of punishment that would cause Western liberals to protest in the streets. You know, when they aren't protesting abortion or oil or some other stupid shit. Like public whippings or removing of a finger for theft or littering. You know, that kind of draconian enforcement. There will be some that look at that with an existential dread. However, there will be those that wouldn't do that anyway, and so they would be more than happy with those kinds of punishments because to them it's simply a form of exceptional quality control. If the society didn't do any of that anyway, the perception of draconian punishment and heavy-handedness wouldn't even exist because the society is in good working order. Under those circumstances, you can have nice things because you have a high-trust society. Everyone knows how to behave with a set of standards, and no one is gallivanting about like a reckless pillock. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.